Afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon. Please take a seat. Please take a seat. You can come closer if you wish. Please take a seat. Let's talk about a polarized and fragmented world today, and the seed sector within all of that. I would actually just like to start with, if you may, a very short personal anecdote about this. Some of you who may know me know that I worked some 12 years ago as a public affairs manager for the European Seed Association. I studied politics and sociology, and when I was studying, people around me, we were idealists. We wanted to change the world, right? You go into politics to change the world. I can tell you that when I told them I was going to become a public affairs manager for the seed industry, a lot of people didn't consider that that would be a good thing to do to change the world. You know, they would see that as a force of conservatism and precisely doing the very opposite. I got some pretty harsh reactions, to be honest, from then colleagues of my masters and all that. You know, they didn't really appreciate my choice. They would prefer to see me going into, I don't know, NGOs and things like that to change the world. And the other thing that I spotted the day before I started the job was a tag on the logo of the association in the street which said assassins. So there was an S missing, which may say something about the general literacy of the person who had put the tag on there. But let's say that that really shaped my entrance into the industry, because the next day was my first day in the job. And I have to say, I was a bit sort of, wow, I knew nothing much about the sector, but obviously it did have an impact. And it had one impact on me, which was to try and do my best to reach out to what I then perceived as the other side. And I spent a lot of time going to, you know, conferences organized by the European Green parties and things like that. And I had some pretty heated debates, but I really tried. I really tried to open up and go and speak to the other side, and probably way more than I should have. I'm not saying it made any difference at the end of the day, but that's how it shaped me. And I would like to kick off with that very question to all of you. Can you give us an idea of maybe an anecdote or something around the seed sector that has shaped the way you have worked, your attitude, your positions, and how that has affected maybe the work of your organizations or your work within your organizations? And I would first like to hand the floor to Hans Hoogeven. He is the independent chair at the Food and Agriculture Organization. Hans, over to you.
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to really compliment ISF, the International Seed Federation, but the whole sector for this wonderful, great congress. Here you feel and see the energy. But there is also a but. I will come later to that. And I'm feeling living in two worlds. Achieve what we have to achieve, but we are not achieving it. And we are realizing now that we cannot do it without the private sector and companies. And I've seen with my own eyes that, and certainly the part of the Dutch companies like Rijkswaan, East West Seed, Plantum, that they can make a difference at the country level. But that has to change, because you cannot only look to the 50 billion turnover. You have to take your role in the international community. You have to demand your role. Only then we can make the change. But the diplomats are not going to make the change anymore. We have seen that. And we depend on your company, your investments, but also your sector operating as a sector. And I'll tell you something more later on. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Hans. And Hans will unfortunately have to leave us at 2:30. He has an important commitment in Rome, so please excuse him when he has to leave at that point. We're also joined by Robynne Anderson. You are CEO at Emerging Ag. Can you tell us how public perception of the seed sector has shaped your attitude, your positions?
Thanks so much, and absolutely, my journey was the opposite of yours, because I grew up in the seed business. I grew up on a seed farm, a pedigreed seed operation in Canada, roguing fields, all of the frontline stuff with an integrated seed cleaning facility on the farm. So I grew up believing seed first right from the beginning. That was the lens that everything in agriculture, everything in the food system depended on seed. And as I went out into the wider world, having already run a company that actually had seed magazines like Seed World and Germination and others, moving on to working with the International Seed Federation on the Intellectual Property Committee and other things, the bigger and bigger my world got through the journey of seed, the more and more I realized that the rest of the world didn't think it was seed first. They thought we were just an input at the beginning. And I think that journey is now maybe coming home to all of us in the seed sector, because I do still think that's my home. It's impossible from my birthright to see it the other way around. But we see the challenge of getting us to understand that the rest of the world doesn't think that you can't proceed without seed in a strange way. And that's impossible. It's almost a switch beyond our imagination. But we do have to understand that we are part of a much bigger ecosystem and that we need to deliver in a different way.
Yeah, what appears to be extremely obvious when you're in the sector suddenly doesn't become so obvious when you go outside the doors of this Congress. Thank you. We're also joined then by Michael Hoevel, you're Managing Director of Marchmont Communications. Can you share something about your story and how it's shaped your work?
Yeah, thanks very much, and thanks to our hosts, ISF, for the event as well. It's been really great to be here. I have yet another different perspective on this because I grew up as a suburban kid in California with no real farming background. So for me, I think the really big first formative experience for me was actually when I was volunteering, setting up a school in rural China, in Western China, in Qinghai province, in my early 20s. I was invited by one of the local teachers to go back to his family farm and help him and his family with their barley harvest. And it was basically 7 of us, I think, for the better part of a week, by hand, harvesting, bundling, transporting, threshing, and bagging what ended up being, I think, kind of 3 or 4 big bags of barley. And it just had this really, really profound impact on me because it made me realize what actually goes on in the process of farming. And I guess, since then I've kind of moved on and I'm now running a communications agency, but we focus very much at the kind of cross-section of communications, global development, and food systems in the work that we do with different clients. And I see agriculture almost from that opposite perspective. You walk through the halls here and everything is about innovation and technology, and it reminds you how far the sector has come, but also what is left to still do. And in some ways, that's kind of symptomatic of how I see the seed sector myself. On one hand, it's a very straightforward thing. It's this small, tangible thing. Everybody is familiar with it. They've either put some in the ground or they've eaten them, right? But then on the other hand, it's symbolic, or it's become this kind of proxy issue that actually represents some of the biggest systemic challenges that we face. And so how does the general population navigate something like that? In my experience, their purchasing decisions are around simple things like accessibility and affordability and quality, but they also care about the broader sustainability or equity issues around it. They just don't know how to make sense of it. So they're either helpless, or on the other hand, they form these strong opinions based on very limited sets of information. So they watch one documentary or read one newspaper article or talk to one person who's in the sector with a particular mindset. And it really kind of distorts the way that we end up as communicators having to then embrace the issue through the professional work that we do.
And that's when the element of debate comes in. Great, thanks. And then we have Michael Keller, Secretary General of ISF. I mean, you're on the front lines, let's say, of communicating about the sector. Can you say something about your own personal story and how it's shaped your approach to this work and how public perception of the sector has shaped your work here?
I think it should. Thanks for the question. It was certainly not in my personal business plan to end in this up, but I think I would start like this without making too much a deep dive in psychology. One of my jobs in past was I was representative and the voice of the French Mayors Association. That means I worked in France representing 36,000 municipalities. That means you cannot be more politically correct than represent 36,000 local authorities. I mean, those who are working with the people on the ground in small villages, providing public services, supporting the people. That means connected to the people. This was my job. That means at European and international level. And also I got a call, like you got your call one day from someone called, "Are you still happy?" I say, "I'm happy. I'm very happy with what I'm doing." But hey, think about it. There could perhaps be also other things. Make the story short. 4 months later, I started. I cannot say politically incorrect company, because then I would say something about our members. But I started in a company from the other side of the Atlantic. A big one. A big one. And I became public affairs and regulatory affairs leader of this big one. That means I went from the politically totally correct, easygoing job, running around the world, everybody welcomed me easily, to a corporate, a big one. And I arrived, because I'm a lawyer, and I arrived in the world of biotechs and GMOs. My first thing to do was, I was sleeping at night, I got a call. "Yeah, here's the police. We have slashings in your fields in France." That means this was the time we had slashings in the fields in Europe. That means you can imagine this is something, anyway, I was totally unprepared, because I thought, oh my goodness, the world is good, we are talking together, we are engaging with another, and we build compromises and all this based on science. And I discovered this world. That means you can imagine, psychologically, I was perhaps at that time not really ready to go in at that level, and I had to build my mind. But I think this shaped my mind also from this, super easygoing to the opposite. We need to find a middle ground. We need to find something that makes sense. And that's exactly where I would like to say, we are trying to go when we discuss about innovation. Yes, there are discussions, but come on, there needs to be dialogue. We need to find solutions to go together. But this is my experience, and it's a rather personal experience, but for me it shaped my mind on this topic.
Well, we're all people, and that's why I felt it was important to start with a personal experience, because I think it does shape very much how we approach life. I mean, it's not all about, organizations, it's also about us and how we want to shape things. But we've all somehow talked about elements of this debate. We know there is some controversy out there with public opinion and public perception. And I would like to go back to you, Hans, and ask you the question, do you think that in any way the seed industry has done certain things that have contributed to creating this sense of controversy around it? Are there things that they have done that they should not have done? And maybe more importantly, are they things that they should be doing better moving forwards?
Thank you. Yeah. Change the world, I would say. Oh, but I think the most important thing is, and I said it in the beginning, you should be proud. Proud of your companies, proud of your sector. Absolutely proud, because you did enormous positive things. But we should also be proud of the farmers. You've seen in the Netherlands how it can go wrong if we are not proud of the farmers anymore, because seed is life, but farmers are also life. And that's the basic in the world we are living. And we have to be much more honest. The Deputy Director General said on Monday that FVO is working with the private sector. Let's be honest. FVO at this moment is not working with the companies. They're not even allowed to work with the companies by the Director General. That's also part of the world. But let's say it to each other, because then we can take a step forward. And for the sector, I think it's enormous important that you don't miss the boat. Where I'm saying that the public opinion can turn. We have seen cases in your sector where it made a difference. And it's important that you are aware of the public opinion. You have a story, a narrative to tell. And you have a beautiful song now from our Anton van Doormalen. And that should be listened to, because I saw it on YouTube yesterday evening, and I know him quite well. This is a story that you can tell. But you have to also to convince the public that you're doing more than only getting profit. Because we need you on the ground in the countries, because you can make the change about food security by the training of your farmers and doing a little bit more than only getting profit. As I said in my first intervention, only the business can change the world when we get closer to our food security. But it also means that you should be not modest anymore. You're way too modest. I'm working also with the dairy sector, with the grain sector. They are standing there in the international community and demanding their positions. You have all the right to demand your position in the international negotiations. But you're a little bit too modest. As companies, you are doing great, but as sector, you need more Michaels than only Michael sitting here. And I'm really saying, because, for example, we have the negotiations on access and benefit sharing. Everybody knows now that you have a turnover of 50 billion people. But we need also the benefit sharing. And you cannot agree with yourself about 10 million for the smaller farmers. If that goes to the public opinion goes against you. But you don't need, because you are in a position to change that discussion internationally. But you have to step up and you have to unify your sector. Small, medium and bigger companies. And that's crucial. You have to be much more visible. You have a story to tell, not only amongst yourselves in this beautiful 3 days and doing business, but also to the public, to the politicians, and certainly to the diplomats, because most of the diplomats don't know what they are speaking or negotiating about. And that's what needs to be told. So, demand your international position, but put forward concrete proposals as a sector. And last but not least, the youth. You cannot be in a panel or making a statement if you don't say anything about the youth. But let's be honest. Often it remains nice wording. You are in the high-tech sector. The youth is the next generation. You have to invest already now, bring them around the table. Not having a corner here somewhere in the building, but bringing them to the table about the future of your sector. Invest in them, and also we are working now on an initiative to give them some seed funding for startups. That's crucial, because they will bring the story further, but we need them. Without, we cannot do it. But really, let's invest in them. Not with nice words, but with real funding. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Robynne, I don't know if this is going to be a tricky one, but let's give it a try. Have there been some business-driven decisions? To come back a little bit to this question around access and benefit sharing as an example, but there are some business-driven decisions that make sense from a business perspective that may have had a damaging impact on the public opinion of the seed sector. I can think just randomly of a few lawsuits, against farmers that may have been perceived badly, whether those were rational on a legal side, very likely. But should those business decisions also take into account public opinion? Would you advise the seed sector to also take into account public opinion when considering business decisions?
Fantastic question. I think I would echo many of the themes that Hans has touched upon, including the fact that, first of all, as business, there's a need to be swimming in this environment so you actually understand what that opinion is before you take your business decision. And I think Michael deserves a lot of credit, Michael Keller here, who has been the president of the International Agri-Food Network, which is made up of all the associations across the value chain and is engaging at FAO and in these UN spaces, and then beginning to hear what some of these decisions are. And absolutely, if you take a decision in isolation, it can have a huge impact. So you can think you're making a right decision, but if you don't understand the whole picture, it may in fact not be the right decision. And that can be true even on things that you're doing from a reputational enhancement perspective, where I know many seed companies who've made really strong decisions to engage in different spaces, but haven't necessarily stopped to fully engage in this space before making that intervention. And we talked about youth. I think that's incredibly important, and it's great to see Engine and some of the actors here who are on the front lines of this. Thanks, Nellie, for all the work that you guys are doing. So there's some great interventions that have been done. Water efficient maize and other things that have happened, as many as there are also. In fact, there's probably more examples of good interventions. But I think the challenge we have is that engagement in the ecosystem. And the seed industry tends to talk about spaces like access and benefit sharing, which have a bigger global picture, or UPOV and other elements of the international discussion that are very directly related to seed. But we don't see that same level of engagement if you look down the ways to the climate change negotiations, or if you look down the ways to the broader food security negotiations, or as a woman in agriculture, even, is the gender profile on the seed sector adequate? 100 years, no woman in charge, just gonna throw it out there. But I think it's time to sort of examine whether or not the seed sector has leaned into spaces that are possible to lean into. So if we're talking about land degradation in Riyadh this year during the CCD on drought and desertification, there have been people in this sector who've been working for 60, 70, perhaps 100 years on restoration crops. Why is the seed sector not present in those discussions? Why are we not leaning into the question about, is it land degradation or is it soil health? What's the solution we offer? And I think that's where we fail to engage in the larger conversation, even when we're trying to do the right thing. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. And Michael, then, to follow up on that, is it from a communications perspective just easier to shape public opinion with negative stories? And therefore what we're talking about here, polarization, fragmentation comes from negative stories, controversial stories, and it's much more difficult to lead on a narrative in terms of communications when we're talking about the more positive case studies, to echo what Robynne's saying. Is that why we're in this situation?
I do think that there's appetite for negative stories and their easy wins, I think, in media. And we can get into that maybe later in a bit more detail. But I also think that we have the ability to shape what that looks like as a sector more than what is happening at the moment. Probably 20 times I've seen headlines that say something along the lines of, our food system is broken, or we need to fix our food system. And as a communicator, it drives me absolutely bonkers crazy. Why is that? Because language matters, and our food system is far from broken, right? And COVID, recently is a very good example that shows how resilient and robust the global food system is. However, I do think that we need to, as a sector and more broadly, acknowledge the fact that the 21st century challenges that society is expecting us to deliver on are more and more interconnected than the 20th century challenges that the sector, I think, is currently operating from. So it's not just about production and calories and farmer benefits. It has to be on solutions that address the more systemic challenges that we as a sector maybe don't think are relevant to us. Climate, right, definitely, even into nutrition, even into peace and security, right? A lot of these things are, these issues are actually traceable back to whether or not a farmer can put a seed in the ground or not. And I also think off the back end of that, if we do embrace that, in this very chaotic communication landscape that we operate in now, we become clearer in terms of the vision that we want as a sector to have, and it means that there's less opportunity for others to shape the reputation that they want to give us. And that is hugely important because we don't live in a world today where we can just go out and tell people what we want them to think of us. Yeah.
Brilliant, no, thank you. And Michael, maybe also a quick reflection, because I will like to go to the audience as well, but a quick reflection on, what the industry has been doing maybe badly and what it could do better in terms of building its reputation, its image, and fighting these narratives.
I think it's clear still today, and Hans mentioned a certain figure, what is our turnover as industry. But however you take this turnover, you just take one company from the crane trade, you have the same turnover of one company at the same level. I think perhaps we have the thinking, it's a lot, but you take this as a global level, it's not a lot. And this is representing perhaps the difficulty we have also as the seed sector. I think until now, it's still, and this food systems discussion showed it quite well, until now still, we don't have the right understanding in the whole discussion that all starts with the seeds somewhere. And it starts with the seeds. We know there are other things necessary. We fully agree. And the discussion on soil health and all this is important. However, we're always saying the same. The seed is not right, the harvest will never be right. And I think when you think about food systems and food systems transformation, we are far away to get also right that they should think also where all this is starting. Because it's nice as a food company saying, oh, I go now regenerative. All will become regenerative. All will become agroecology. Or all will become sustainable. Yeah, okay, nice. But you need to think about this starts somewhere. And I think this is clearly for me where the bottleneck is. And that's where we have still today the difficulty. Yes, we need to multiply, not me, not the Michael Kellers, thank you for mentioning this, but we need also somehow to be clear, there's nothing more diverse than the seed sector. There's nothing more diverse also somehow the crops we are working on as the private sector. There's nothing more diverse also the whole value chain we can build up. But the narrative and the engagement, we don't have it at that level. And I think that's where we need to work on.
Maybe Hans, you can just react, because I saw you slightly disagreeing with the comparison with the grain sector. So can you just please react on that one? And I will then go to the audience, especially if you have a question or comment for Hans before he goes. So please.
Yes, I was a little bit shaking because when I said don't be too modest, you can always say somebody's more rich than I am. But the added value of the seed sector to food security is the highest when it comes to achieving food security, when it comes to agriculture. So that story is there. Demand your place in the negotiations. Don't become a diplomat. Be honest and demand your place with good proposals. And I would be, for perhaps 1 month, change jobs with you, Michael. Because I'm so eager. I've seen it, and I've seen on both parts. I'm sitting, going to the field with the companies and seeing what you're doing on the ground, because there it has to be done. But I also see how much you can achieve as a sector with a proposal and demanding your place in the negotiations, because then they will listen. Now there are easy tricks to be done in the negotiations, but if you demand your place, that's why I say that sector has to take the lead if we really want to change where we have to achieve worldwide, but it has to be at a national level.
I think it would make for a great TV show if you would switch jobs for a month. Any question?
I would love then to have your office in FAO, okay?
Any question or comment for Hans before he takes off? This is your chance. A question, a comment, something that he can react to? No? Okay, so thanks a lot, Hans, for having been with us.
I do apologize, but...
No, you have a commitment. It's normal. Thank you. So we've been focusing a lot on the, let's say, on the substance, right, on the content. I would actually also like to take a sidestep and talk about the fabric of communications itself, because you're also experts in communication, you're working in communication, in media, and it's obvious that this landscape of communications is completely changed. It's obvious that it's also a lot more fragmented. We don't have like the central source of news. We don't have the central trusted authority of news and information. Everyone is informing everyone. So this obviously is a new reality that when we're talking about communicating whatever it is we want to communicate, we also have to deal with that. So I would like to understand from your perspective how this fabric of communications is also affecting the way you're approaching this for your clients, for the sector, for the industry. Maybe I can start with you, Michael, just to give us a sense of how that fabric has changed for a start.
Sure, thanks. Yeah, so just to kind of go into that in a bit more detail, you know, the 20th century was this era of mass communication, and it made it a very cushy job to be in the communications sector, because you basically had a select number of radio stations or TV channels, you had a captive audience, and kind of legacy media. So, you know, print publications that would be delivered to people's door, and it was all very controlled. So as a communications person, you could very easily say, for this audience, I'm going to use this channel and say this message, and I'm going to have a lot of control over how it's said, and I'm going to reach them. And then you go back up the chain and you say, for this other audience that matters, I will instead use this channel with this other set of messaging and make them care about us in this particular way. What the internet has done is has completely exploded that. So the kind of top-down communications channels that existed in the 20th century, I mean, are still there, but they're less and less and less relevant. And what's happening now is you have a much more horizontal hierarchy in terms of who gets to communicate with whom and how. And what that creates is just a lot more chaos. So again, from a communications perspective, we're much less in control of how our clients are perceived in a space, and it's much more about creating conditions that allow the external landscape to agree with the perception that we have of ourselves and then amplify it. That is not easy to do, and it creates a lot of challenges, but it's the reality that we operate in. How do you address that? I think it means that you have to take a much more kind of substantive approach to how you define your vision and mission. If you leave anything to chance, others will come in and completely overload the kind of information systems that exist with narratives of your sector that fill in the gaps, right? Yeah, so I think that that's the way that I see it.
And does this new fabric then, maybe Robynne, you can have a go at this one. I mean, does this new fabric automatically enhance the very simple, harsh, caricatural message a lot more than the more long-term, tough to communicate, science-based, data-driven type of messaging that will, you know, just require a lot more time to be convincing and appealing to an audience? Does it kind of favor one side over another? And does that make it then even more difficult for a business sector in particular to position itself in this communications landscape?
I'm going to be radical and say no, but not for the reason you're expecting. I think that when you find that space where you're filling in who you are, the seed industry has at its core diversity. When we think about it in the narrowest sense, right? We think about the diversity of the varietals we're testing. We think about genetic diversity. We may think of across the breadth of the offering from vegetable crops to forage crops to grain crops, etc. But in reality, that diversity is actually what the world is calling for. When Michael said it's broken apart into all these constituent pieces, and you need to lean into those spaces and you need to lean into the diversity of those spaces, you must do so with authenticity. So the good thing is you actually already care about diversity. So we can talk about youth, we can talk about women, we can talk about range of crops, all those things. Something in the core of diversity actually matters to you. And I think the challenge for the seed sector is not that we can just stand back and say, well, here is the science-based solution. If we keep doing that, we will fail. We're kind of already candidly failing at it. That's because people want outcomes, and people want to know the core of what you are. So if we look at the breadth of those opportunities, how do you lean into something like International Year of Pulses? That's something that I worked on, where we had 1 billion social media hits back in 2016, talking about a whole range of crops. And the seed sector was candidly barely involved, right? We can talk about rangelands that are coming up and grasslands that the World Wildlife Federation is super interested in. You have huge forage sectors and grass sectors. Why are you not leaning into all of these disparate conversations? And the breakdown of traditional media means it's actually relatively cost effective to do so. So instead of saying we're going to stand here as seed first and have our hierarchy of our superiority because we underpin this whole system, say we bring value to this system. We are the start of the system. Here's how we can help pull through. And go to the places that other people are building stories that are actually part of what you do. And so I think you can really turn this around, and it's actually a huge opportunity. But if you sit back and say we must do it through conventional channels and we must be science-based and somebody should listen to our scientists about how you should do gene edit, instead of talking about we want good health on our soils and we want a great climate and we want people to be inclusive, you will fail. Thanks.
Okay, so we're not so much interested in the process. We're interested in the impact and the outcomes, and we don't need to know necessarily the whole the whole system and the whole process behind. Michael, I mean, so this fabric of communications is basically also pushing a business-to-business traditional communication for the seed sector into a business-to-consumer, a business-to-public opinion communication, which might not necessarily be something that you want to do. Do you think it's your business, actually, to go about trying to enter into polarized, controversial debates, try and change public opinion? I mean, is that really actually your business? Business is going great in the seed sector. No?
Business is going great. We have years it's good. We have years it's less good. We have sometimes crops the year is good, sometimes the crop the year is not good. I think to say now all the business is good, you give the impression, yeah, we should pay more in access and benefit sharing. We should always be careful. Look on Marine here in front of me. But no, more seriously, yes, there's a reality out there. I think the whole sector was always driven, let's provide the seed and the seed choice to farmers. That's our job. That's our day-to-day job. That's where our companies and our business is on. Yes, but we know exactly, and I think, let's give the example. You know, Internet Seed Federation, 8 years ago, we had no communications manager. We have done nothing on communication. I'm not saying here, I'm not judging what was done or not done, but it was just a reality. It was not seen as important to communicate. It was not seen. It was important to negotiate. It was important to sit in the discussions. But I think, and that's the learning for me also, we lost the battle some years back on innovation. We lost the battle. And I think we lost the battle because as an entire sector, we didn't engage in the discussion. I think as an entire sector, we failed to engage in the discussion. And the discussion was driven somehow company by company. And I think this is something where we understood also, as a sector, we are sitting in the same boat. What means this also was, we have to gear up. And that's exactly the points we heard before. Yes, seed choice for farmers is our priority. But this seed choice to farmers, yes, this has tremendous impact also on, the climate change, the food production, the consumption, because the requests are more and more. We need more nutritional food. We need more this. We need more this. And again, it starts with the seeds. And I think this is something where the seed people, no, we were rather B2B. That's for sure. But we understood if to keep this and to really not only get the right understanding, but also to be part of the debate, yes, we need to go out. And I'm also saying we have nothing to hide. We have nothing to hide. We are extremely transparent sector, you know, and this is something where until now we are still working on it, how we can go further, how we can also take our social responsibilities we have, and when we mentioned earlier, youth is a tremendous topic, and I think also as a sector we have to engage on this. I'm happy that we started here in youth. Women is the same. You know, this is exactly what we're saying. We are not only here to seed for farmers actors, no, we are socially responsible actors. And I think this is something, let's be frank, in our workflow, we just started also about the social, environmental responsibility. In our sector, we started on, let's work on the value chain. You know, therefore we can, I'm always saying, I know Robynne is pushing us, go, go, go. Yeah, but the sector is not ready as itself for the moment. We need to, you know, slowly build this up. Slowly build up to think about, hey, when we have the climate change discussions, come on, we need to be there, certainly. But how to be there? What's our story? All this, that's a common effort we need still to build.
So I'd just like to push a little bit further and maybe bring in the other Michael on this, because this Michael said it. We need to go out of just the kind of diplomatic route and sitting at the negotiations and go more into this sort of communications route. But who is the seed sector actually trying to convince of what? At the end of the day, I mean, is it like a value chain type approach? Is it really like the end consumer? Is it the citizen? Do we go that far?
So it's fair to say that not every audience is equally weighted for the seed sector, but unless some of you are aliens, you know, we all eat food, and thus every single person on the planet is your audience, because they all have a stake in what you produce. And I think if you go back to the kind of late 90s and like, you know, early biotech in Europe, for instance, there was huge public favorability around biotech adoption. But candidly, I think the industry had a very narrow perspective about who their audiences were, and they thought that they were regulators, tick, and they thought that they were farmers, tick. And then if the science was there, they could just roll everything out because the fundamentals of the path to commercialization were there. And look at the state of that, you know, in the EU now. Look at something like golden rice, which is a travesty, 25 years almost in the making, a perfectly viable product, and getting rolled back in the Philippines from adoption. There are countless examples of very good science not having any impact, and you could define impact as commercial impact if you'd like to, or you could define it as something broader. And that to me is a travesty, but it's the reality that we live in now, that we live in an information society where everybody feels like they have an opinion that they want to share, and public opinion can swarm around an issue or a sector or a company or product very quickly. If we don't manage that proactively, of course we're not going to succeed the way that we want to as a sector.
And would you say, Robynne, that individual companies are more conscious of their responsibility towards the collective as well in some of the approaches they're taking in communications and reputation building? Because it's also true that an individual organization can damage the reputation of a sector. So are there any evolutions there?
I think there's a clear evolution, and it's not just in the seed sector, right? The bigger the companies are, the more pressure is on them for their ESG reporting, the more pressure is on them for their regulatory reporting. And I think the sea change now is the additional financial investor sector pressure. So at the biggest scale, the biggest actors have to do this differently, right? Otherwise, if you're on the wrong side of the assessments, especially some of the national funds that are particularly here in Europe setting up windows of where they will invest, and you're on the wrong side of things, it can really have a huge financial impact. So their game has changed for very concrete reasons. Also, their ability to control those things, not the C that Michael was talking about, but their ability to make a decision and move forward, is much more possible. The challenge that the other Michael is talking about, I'm feeling very left out for not being named Michael. My middle name is after my grandfather, Michael, actually, so maybe I, won't just start using my middle name today, but the...
Michelle.
Michelle, exactly. So, but the other Michael was talking about how hard it is to get everybody going, and he's right, I am always pushing, like, why are you guys not in the soil health coalition with all the other actors in the seed sector, in the agricultural sector? When you get planted directly into that soil, it just doesn't make sense. But I think that building of consensus has to happen faster, and individual large companies see that for themselves, but they don't necessarily see how they bring that into this group. And then I think this group's particularly interesting because there's a lot of discussion and a lot of scene setting based on the big six, or now the big three-ish, but the big actors get so much of the attention in this space, but then there are all these thousands of family-based companies and smaller actors who are doing all sorts of extraordinary things. And the breaking apart that Michael Hoevel was talking about of how you do media actually gives them space and license to be involved. And so if you could take the momentum that you as a little company can lean into hashtag conversations that have millions and billions of hits by just taking the youngster in your office, if it's not you yourself, and getting online, makes a huge difference. And then if they could take that will along with the organized corporate will about here's our risk management factor, and bring that over to the International Seed Federation and say, okay, we all also need to lean into this, that could be game changing. Thanks.
Interesting, thank you. And the point on the financial investors is also interesting because they will also be swayed actually by public opinion in their choices, decisions that they're making. Any questions, comments, reactions, trigger points, things you'd just like to explore? I mean, we're in a kind of exploratory mode here, and you have a few kind of communications experts as well, so has it triggered anything? Any reactions, questions, comments? Yes.
Nobody wants to take the floor. I can go for it. So hi, I just don't know Robynne personally, but I'm Ira, the communications manager of ISF, and we've been in touch, but we've been mentioning communications a lot, and at least me, coming from personally, like I'm a member of an indigenous tribe, and I grew up in very ecological, agrological circles, and I come from a family of nature activists, etc. But my mom was a scientist. She was a biologist, and she was always telling us, you know, the origin of our food, the science behind the food, etc., etc. And so I had a kind of appreciation of both of that, and I always never saw them as conflicting. It was only when I started to work in the UN spaces in international level that I saw, like, we're in opposite camps here, where we have the science lobby and the indigenous lobby, or indigenous advocates, because for some reason, if you don't have money, you're called an advocate, whereas if you have money, you're called a lobby. But when I saw that, I just felt like it just was the wrong kind of conversation, and I don't know exactly how we ended up there. So I'm wondering, in your experience, like, where did you see the kind of break happen, or at least the increasing polarization that happened in those spaces of advocacy and public communications? That's a question.
Yeah, fantastic. Who wants to have a go at that one?
Well, I'll take a leap off, and thank you for an excellent question and all the work that you're doing to bridge those divides. I'm going to say something that is just my own theory here, but I believe that the rural-urban divide is the one that has defined the past 40 years of that polarization. Because if you grow up in a community that is involved in nature or involved in farming, you don't think science is away from that, right? It's impossible to milk a cow and not think that you need to care about mastitis or that there isn't a biological imperative in how you produce seed, etc. So it's a continuum. But I think the moment that we began to see seeds that are now sown at a geopolitical level as well, where we could move into a city and we didn't really need to care about that, and a set of actors were able to, frankly, fundraise by saying, we're going to tell you what's right and wrong about how the world should operate, not having to actually do that biology, but getting to criticize it, we began to see these seeds break down. And by the time we get into a geopolitical situation now where we're watching elections come and go in different ways, I think that divide actually still underpins some very profound things. It's no longer only that, but I think somewhere in that we lost the beat. But if in fact we want to go, oh, well, that's polarizing and therefore we don't need to get into it, then we have lost the beat in the agriculture sector. Because the fact is, this breakdown of communication allows you to go communities of interest that are broader than I'm only on this side or not. And I think we spent a bunch of time saying, oh, well, we're going to go talk to the aunties and we're going to convert them. I think you spoke to that very well at the beginning. I think that's madness, honestly. I'm sure you are a very intelligent man, but the place to go is all the ground in the middle where there are lots of people who want to talk about their experience, even of gardening, right? Think about all the spaces you can creep into the conversation in a way that's just natural, because all that community of gardeners that's all online, all are experience what it is to have a fungal attack or a seed that doesn't germinate. Go talk in the spaces, go talk about the things I've touched on soil health, biodiversity. It's not only about DSI, we're on one side or the other of a debate inside a negotiation on access and benefit sharing. There's also a whole world of communication that you can lean into. And I think that's where we have to take back the polarized space and go talk to the rest of the world. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Michael, you wanted to add something and get your questions ready?
I think Ira's point is excellent, and I want to be very frank. You know, currently I'm the chair of the private sector mechanism of the Committee on Food Security. That means there should be a space where people from all sides are sitting together and thinking, hey, we have a food security issue, we need to address it. It's not the place. Why it's not the place? And then think, that's where we have an issue. United Nations, it's a microcosmos. It's all, should I say it's always the same people? A lot of the same people you meet there. But those who are going there are those who are pushing very often the most radical positions. That means our call should be that you have the people who are really from the ground. You have the people who are working on concrete solutions, but you have not, how should I call this, these professional lobbyists from both sides, by the way. But this is, I think, a reality where you see that you bring into debates ideological approaches, which is not helping to find a compromise, building what we need. And I think this is exactly where I think we need to go beyond. This is exactly where, when you have all these discussions, and we know it on DSI for us, or access and benefit sharing, but also when you have it in the Committee on Food Security, it is always something where you have some of those who have the toughest positions sitting there, instead perhaps of those who are coming from the crowd who are there to find solutions. I think that's a reality to be taken into account.
Okay, thank you. Questions? Comments? Yep, we have one over here. Oh yeah, please go for it. Yep, if you're closer. And please briefly introduce yourself.
Hello, Jack Keys from New Zealand. This has been such an excellent panel, so thank you all so much. Every time I have a question, it gets asked, so that's been great. But one topic I did want to return to just briefly, I was looking at the ISF communication channels, and I see there's an Instagram, apologies if that's me. There's a TikTok, which has 2 followers and no videos at the moment. Perhaps we can do some dancing at the celebration party.
Let's do one
tonight, I'm
now.
not sure. But my question is, on some of these less controllable medias and where you are communicating directly with civilians and consumers, etc., are these areas you think we should be leaning into as well? And is that a role of someone like an ISF? And if so, how do you think you approach it when these things can potentially go out of control because you have less control over who will comment and who will share, etc.?
I'd like Michael in the middle to have a go at that one, because here we're really also on the tool. You know, is it in a way, is it right? Is it the space really for a business organization to be on these kinds of channels, on these kinds of tools?
Sure. Thanks for that question. So I'm agnostic in terms of channels to choose, because you choose channels based on how efficiently they allow you to connect to the audiences that you need to care about. But broadly speaking, today we need to think in kind of in a multi-channel way, but acknowledging the fact that not all audiences matter the same amount to your work, and different channels require different amounts of time and energy and resource to deliver successfully on them. An event like this for TikTokers would probably be inappropriate for the amount of effort and money and expense and flying that it takes to get everyone in the room. But running a social media account with some drumbeat content, potentially generated initially through AI and then proofread and sense checked and loaded up, so that you have some kind of ongoing presence that again fills that reputation like void that would exist otherwise, I think is essential. And then I think the other thing is probably at the ISF level, so at the industry level, thinking about not just what reputational considerations there are now to be addressed, but if we can as a sector hustle enough that we can get on the front foot, what needs to be happening now to reach young people who are going to be the ones shaping reputation and making decisions 20 and 30 years from now. And that's where platforms like TikTok become a bit more relevant, because that's where young people are getting information from at the moment, and those young people will be growing into the influencers and decision makers of tomorrow.
Until there's some new social media thing that comes in and replaces it, adds another logo to your long list of channels. Okay, one more. We have time for maybe one more. Yes, I'll do this one. Briefly introduce yourself, please.
Hi, my name is Nick Blumenthal, and I'm from the United States. I know we've had the pleasure, Michael on the stage right and Robynne, of meeting before. As one of those young members, when we're talking about how we're saying not just the science, but also those social impact opportunities for the future, I'm curious, as someone young who's very newly introduced to kind of the seed sector overall, what are some of those challenges to getting the sector unified in order to be involved more in those social impact portfolios? I know, Robynne, your earlier comments about kind of the Soil Health Coalition and just recently that prior question brought to mind about how people in my generation, I can think of countless numbers of friends or family that are interested in wildlife conservation, that recognize the importance of biodiversity loss. They might not know who the World Wildlife Federation is or the Nature Conservancy and what sort of work they do, but they do realize the importance of what it is to then be caring about those sorts of spaces. And so I'm curious about where the seed sector could potentially be in that place in the either near or distant future, however far that might be, and what are the challenges that are inhibiting us from getting there a little bit faster? Thank you.
Okay, I think Michael, Keller, you can't hide on this one.
I thought we ask our communications support here. No, look, as I mentioned, I take the example of ISF to be very concrete. 8 years back, we were nowhere. Okay, and then we started, and I give you an example. We started then to work on, LinkedIn. And in the beginning, when we started to work on LinkedIn, I wanted to see everything which is going out to be sure it's in line with ISF positions. You know, totally institutional, and then slowly we learned, hey, we need to be reactive, we need to be proactive, we should be able also, whenever something is popping up, to be engaged. And this is a process, I think, for us in the seed sector, we had to learn. And sometimes it's clear, things went then out where I thought, take a little more time perhaps, because you send things out, perhaps it's not 100% aligned with our position. That's the thinking where we should not forget, we are an association, we are representing lots of different views and sensitivities also. And this is clear something which is perhaps still handicapping ourselves also to fully engage. And I say fully engage because, I start to work with X, how you call it today. I gave up after 10 days because at the end it's continuously, you never stop again. But that's a mindset, we need just, and that's where Ira, and I hope it's not her fault for the 2-person only connected to TikTok. It's just we don't have it still yet in our mindset to be able also to send out the messages. That's the whole work. We are looking at people like Michael to help us how we can also really be proactive in the different segments where I think we need certainly to be, but we don't have the real knowledge for the moment. Let's be clear, and the way of doing.
It makes me think, a small aside, and then I promise we close. But yesterday morning we had a panel on plant breeding innovation. We were looking at new genomic techniques. And we had someone from the European Commission explaining how they're going to categorize the new genomic techniques into 2 basic categories of types of technology. And then someone said in the audience, it's difficult to categorize this technology really because it just moves constantly, so you can't just apply a regulatory lens on technology. And what you're saying is as an image to the seed industry, or actually any industry, public opinion also doesn't work with position paper type categories. So you can't apply a position paper to public opinion on issues. Like issues are fluid. So maybe that's also another way of thinking about, approaching a positioning of a sector. It's less on position papers, but more on, the world in a way, and linking things up. I would like to finish with a last challenge to the 3 of you, very quick, very short, very, very, very sparkly. We've been talking about innovation a lot over this Congress, thinking about plant breeding innovation, of course. I want you to reflect on innovation in communication, okay? And give us a sense to this audience what that is for you, innovation in communication for the seed sector, moving forwards to address polarization, fragmentation of the world, okay? What does that look like in a very short and concise way? Innovation and communication. Who wants to have a go? I think Michael in the middle is going to go for it first.
I can start. I think this is probably more a summation of what we've already been discussing. But I talk a lot about the difference between inside-out communications and outside-in communications. And the instinct for an organization is to have inside-out communication, which is what do we care about? What products or services do we have that we want to try to get other people to also care about or engage with? And it's a natural instinct, and it's not necessarily a wrong one, but it needs to be balanced with outside-in communication. And that is where are our audiences now? Are they even aware of the issue? Do they understand it? Do they support it? If it's not those 3 things, they're not going to take action to be aligned with you. What are the issues that they care about? What are safe, low-hanging fruit areas where there's common interest, so that we don't have to immediately get into a polarized debate, but we can start the conversation in the middle ground in a way that advances us a bit. So it's that walking before running kind of instinct. So outside-in communication alongside the inside-out.
Thank you. Let the light in. Okay, thank you. Over to you, Robynne.
Well, basically what he said, absolutely. And I think to give a couple of examples, then pick 3 issues that are in that low-hanging fruit. I mean, I've talked about soil health, you could talk about climate. I was just chatting with people who are doing urban agriculture. You can find space trials. That's ripe for something on TikTok or something that is a channel that is a different kind of campaign. It's not just a negotiating issue, it is a topic. And pick 3 things that you can all agree on, because you all actually care about the diversity of the agri-food sector, and go for it, right? And I think that's the challenge, is building that consensus and lean into it. And please, please do that. Thank you.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. And then Michael, concise.
Yesterday evening, I was sitting in a greenhouse for a dinner. And I will not name the company, I will not make a promotion. However, I was sitting in a greenhouse in a dinner, and for me the story is get out of greenhouse and tell the stories. Tell the stories. Because I discovered a story from a person who worked 51 years as a breeder and who created things. We are the most innovative sector. And we have people like this you will never find in any other sector. 51 years breeding, creation. Who can tell stories like this? Get the people out of greenhouses and tell these kind of stories. We need all of them. We don't need this communication, which is a more formal communication. We need these stories also. Therefore, get out of greenhouse, tell your story. We have so much nice stories to tell.
And that is why we started this panel with personal anecdotes, which makes a big difference. And even Ira's personal anecdote brings a difference. A warm round of applause, one more. Please go for it for the 3 Michaels. Thank you.